The earth rumbled like a hungry beast beneath Fiona Turner's feet as she stood at the entrance to the Silvercliff mine, her heart stopping when the terrible sound of timbers cracking echoed through the canyon. Men scattered from the mine entrance, coughing and covered in dust, but her father wasn't among them. It was 1879 in Durango, Colorado, and Fiona had just watched her worst nightmare unfold before her eyes. "Father!" She screamed, rushing toward the mine entrance only to be held back by Mr. Holloway, the mine foreman. "Miss Turner, you can't go in there." His weathered face was grave as he gripped her shoulders. "The whole eastern shaft has collapsed, but my father is still in there." Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. "Timothy Turner is still in there." The crowd of miners looked away, none meeting her desperate gaze. Fiona had ridden into town that morning to bring her father his forgotten lunch pail, a simple act of daughterly devotion that had placed her at the worst possible place at the worst possible time. "We'll organize a rescue," Mr. Holloway said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But Miss Turner, you should prepare yourself. That section took the worst of it." "No." Fiona wrenched herself free of his grasp. "I won't leave him. He's alive, I know it." As the miners gathered tools and debated rescue strategies, a tall figure on horseback approached from the dusty road. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he strode toward the commotion. "What's happened here?" His voice was deep, commanding attention without raising in volume. Fiona turned to see a man she didn't recognize, though in a town the size of Durango, that wasn't unusual. He stood over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. His face was partly shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity of his blue eyes. He wasn't dressed like the miners in their rough work clothes, nor like the businessmen of town in their suits. Instead, he wore the practical attire of a man who lived by his own rules: denim pants, a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt, and a revolver strapped to his hip. "Mine collapse," Mr. Holloway explained. "We've got men trapped inside." "How many?" the stranger asked. "We think just one." The foreman glanced at Fiona. "Miss Turner's father." The stranger's gaze found hers, and Fiona felt an unexpected jolt. There was something in those eyes, compassion mixed with determination, that made her stand straighter. "Ethan Irwin," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I've worked rescue in mines before. Maybe I can help." "We need all the help we can get," Mr. Holloway admitted. "The eastern shaft collapsed, and we're not sure how stable the rest is." "You know the layout?" Ethan asked. "My father has been working this mine for 15 years, Fiona interjected, stepping forward. "I know every tunnel, every shaft. I've studied his maps." Ethan appraised her with new interest. She was unlike most women he'd encountered in his travels. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid. Her blue dress was simple and unadorned with the fashionable bustles that most women wore. And there was an intelligence in her green eyes that commanded respect. "Miss Fiona Turner, and I'm going in with you." Ethan shook his head immediately. "It's too dangerous. He's my father." Her voice didn't waver. "And I know this mine better than anyone here except him." The miners muttered their objections, but Ethan studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "Stay close to me and do exactly as I say." Mr. Holloway looked like he wanted to object further, but time was precious. "I'll gather the men and equipment. We'll need to shore up what's left of the tunnel as we go." While the rescue party organized, Ethan pulled Fiona aside. "Have you ever been in the mine during a collapse?" "No," she admitted. "But Father always said that the eastern shaft had weak support. He complained to the mine owners just last week." Ethan's jaw tightened. Typical. Owners cutting corners until someone gets killed. He looked at her directly. Miss Turner, I won't lie to you. This is dangerous work and we might not. Don't. She raised a hand to stop him. I know what you're going to say, but I refuse to believe it. My father is alive in there. I can feel it. Something in her conviction stirred Ethan. He had seen too many mining disasters in his years of drifting through the Western Territories, had dug out too many bodies. But occasionally, miracles happened, and this determined young woman made him want to believe in one. All right, he said, let's get your father out. Within 20 minutes, they were ready. Ethan had swapped his hat for a miner's helmet with a small oil lamp attached. Fiona had been given one as well, along with a man's canvas jacket that swallowed her slender frame. Mr. Holloway led their party of 6 toward the mine entrance. The main tunnel is still open, he explained, but we'll need to clear debris to reach the eastern shaft. That's where Turner was working today. Fiona's heart pounded as they entered the mine. The air immediately turned cool and damp, smelling of earth and oil and metal. Their lamps cast eerie, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls as they walked deeper into the mountain. She had never been further than the first 50 yards of the mine before, and the weight of the mountain above them was a physical presence pressing down on her consciousness. Ethan walked beside her, so close his arm occasionally brushed hers. You all right? He asked quietly. Yes, she said, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Just worried about father. They reached the junction where the eastern shaft branched off from the main tunnel. Here, the damage from the collapse was evident. The wooden support beams had splintered, and rock and dirt partly blocked the passage. We'll need to clear this carefully, Mr. Holloway warned. Too much disruption could trigger another collapse. The men set to work with shovels and picks, moving debris piece by piece. Ethan joined them, his strength obvious as he lifted stones that took 2 others to move. Fiona worked alongside them, refusing to be relegated to the sidelines. Her smaller hands could reach into crevices the men couldn't, pulling out loose rock to clear the way. An hour passed, then 2. Their progress was agonizingly slow, and Fiona's arms ached from the unaccustomed labor. Sweat soaked her dress beneath the canvas jacket, and her braid had come partly undone, wisps of hair sticking to her face. Miss Turner, one of the miners said gently, perhaps you should wait outside. We'll continue. I'm staying, she interrupted, not looking up from her work. Ethan watched her with growing admiration. Most women of his acquaintance would have fainted at the mere thought of entering a mine, let alone working alongside men to clear a collapse. But Fiona Turner had the spirit of the frontier in her, that stubborn resolve that had pushed settlers across mountains and deserts. As they cleared more debris, they could see that the damage was extensive. The tunnel ahead was completely blocked by a cave that reached to the ceiling. This will take days to clear properly, Mr. Holloway said, despair evident in his voice. We don't have days, Fiona said, fear making her voice sharp. My father doesn't have days. Ethan was examining the blockage carefully, running his hands over the rock. There might be a way, he said slowly. If we can find a gap near the top, I could squeeze through and see what's on the other side. It's too dangerous, Mr. Holloway objected. The whole thing could come down on you. It's a risk I'm willing to take. Ethan's eyes met Fiona's, and she saw in them a promise that he wouldn't abandon her father. They worked to clear more debris near the top of the cave-in, creating a small opening barely large enough for a man to fit through. Ethan removed his vest and handed it to Fiona. I'll go first, he said. If it's stable on the other side, I'll call back to you. Mr. Irwin, she caught his arm, her fingers tightening on the rough fabric of his shirt. Thank you for doing this. He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. We'll find him, Miss Turner. Ethan climbed the pile of debris carefully and positioned himself at the small opening. With a final glance at Fiona, he began to wriggle through, the jagged rocks scraping against his back and shoulders. For a terrifying moment he appeared stuck, but then with a shower of loose dirt and small stones, he disappeared through the gap. Fiona held her breath, counting the seconds. 10, 20, 30. "I'm through." Ethan's muffled voice finally came from the other side. "The tunnel continues here, but there's another collapse about 30 feet ahead. I can see a lamp. Someone's on the other side of it." Fiona's heart leaped. "Father, Father, can you hear me?" she shouted toward the opening. There was a pause, then Ethan's voice again. "He says he's trapped but unharmed. Miss Turner, your father's alive." Tears of relief flooded her eyes as the miners cheered. Mr. Holloway was already organizing how to widen the passage. "I'm going through," Fiona announced, already climbing the debris pile. "Miss Turner, wait," Mr. Holloway started to object, but she was already positioning herself at the opening. "Help me through," she demanded. The miners looked at each other uncertainly. Then one stepped forward to steady her as she began to squeeze through the narrow gap. It was even tighter for her, despite her smaller frame, because she lacked Ethan's upper body strength to push through. Sharp rocks scraped her sides, and for one terrifying moment, she thought she might remain trapped halfway, but then hands gripped her arms from the other side. "I've got you," Ethan said, pulling her the rest of the way through. She emerged into the continuation of the tunnel, coughing from the dust. Ethan helped her to her feet, his hands lingering on her arms to ensure she was steady. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face close to hers in the dim light of their lamps. "Yes," she managed, brushing dirt from her dress. "Where's my father?" Ethan pointed down the tunnel to another wall of collapsed rock and earth. "Behind there. I've been talking to him through a small gap." He led her to the spot, where a small opening near the floor of the tunnel allowed sound to pass through. "Father." Fiona called, kneeling in the dirt. "Father, can you hear me?" "Fiona." Her father's voice, though muffled, was the most wonderful sound she'd ever heard. "Child, what are you doing in here? It's dangerous." A sob of relief escaped her. "I couldn't leave you. Are you hurt?" "Just my pride," Timothy Turner answered, a hint of his usual humor in his voice. "Got a timber across my leg that's pinned me down, but it's not crushed, just stuck." Ethan knelt beside her. "Mr. Turner, I'm Ethan Irwin. We're going to get you out of there, but it's going to take some time." "Appreciate the help, son," Timothy replied. "But you need to be careful. This whole section is unstable. That's what I was checking when it came down." "We'll be careful," Ethan promised, then turned to Fiona. "We need to clear this debris, but we have to do it methodically, or we risk bringing down more." They began working on the second blockage, pulling away stones and dirt to create an opening large enough for a man to pass through. The other miners worked on widening the first gap to bring through more tools. It was painstaking, exhausting work, but Fiona found strength she didn't know she possessed. Occasionally, they paused to check on her father, reassuring themselves that he was still conscious and alert. Hours passed. Fiona's hands became raw and blistered, but she refused to stop. Ethan worked beside her, his shirt soaked with sweat, dirt streaking his tanned face. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, and a wordless communication passed between them: determination, encouragement, and something else that Fiona couldn't quite name. By the time they created an opening large enough to reach Timothy Turner, the oil in their lamps was running low, casting the rescue in an increasingly dim light. Ethan went through first, careful not to disturb the precariously balanced debris. "I see him," he called back. "He's pinned, but alert." Fiona squeezed through after him, ignoring the scrapes and bruises she collected in the process. The space beyond was a small part of the tunnel had held, creating a pocket about 10 feet across. And there, propped against the far wall, was her father. A large wooden support beam lay across his left leg, pinning him to the ground, but he was alive and conscious, his face lighting up when he saw his daughter. "Fiona," he breathed, reaching for her with grimy hands. "My brave, foolish girl." She rushed to him, falling to her knees beside him and embracing him carefully. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his dirt-covered shoulder. "It'll take more than a mind to get rid of me," he assured her, though she could hear the pain he was trying to hide. He looked past her to Ethan, who was already examining the beam that trapped him. "You're not from around here." "Just passing through," Ethan replied, testing the weight of the beam. "Looks like we need to brace this before we can lift it off you." One of the miners squeezed through the opening, bringing extra tools. Together, he and Ethan worked to create a system of smaller timbers to brace the debris around them while they freed Timothy. Fiona stayed by her father's side, giving him sips of water from a canteen and keeping him talking. "Why were you in this section alone?" she asked. Mr. Holloway said the eastern shaft was unstable. Timothy's expression darkened. "That's why I was here. After my shift yesterday, I found fresh cracks in the support beams. Reported it to Holloway, but the owners wouldn't stop production to fix it properly." He glanced at the collapsed tunnel around them. "Guess they'll have to now." Ethan, overhearing this, paused in his work. "You knew it was dangerous, but you came in anyway." "Someone had to document the problem," Timothy said defensively. "If I could prove it was unsafe, Father," Fiona interrupted, "no report is worth your life." Timothy looked at his daughter, his expression softening. "I know, darling, but this mine supports half the families in Durango. If it failed inspection and shut down, people would starve." Ethan returned to his work, but Fiona noticed a new respect in his eyes when he looked at her father. It was a respect she understood her father had always put others before himself, even to the point of foolhardiness. Finally, they were ready to lift the beam. "This is going to hurt," Ethan warned Timothy. "The blood rushing back to your leg will feel like fire." Timothy nodded grimly. "Just do it quickly." Ethan and the other miner positioned themselves on either side of the beam. "On my count." 1, 2, 3, they heaved upward, muscles straining. The beam lifted and Fiona quickly pulled her father's leg free. Timothy cried out in pain, his face contorting. "It's not broken," he gasped as Fiona examined his leg. "Just crushed some, I'll be fine." "We need to get him out of here," Ethan said, eyeing the unstable ceiling. "Can you walk at all, Mr. Turner?" "With help," Timothy said, though doubt clouded his expression. Ethan and the miner positioned themselves on either side of Timothy, lifting him to his feet. He swayed, leaning heavily on them, his injured leg barely touching the ground. "Fiona, you go through first," Ethan directed. "We'll pass your father through, then follow." She hesitated, not wanting to leave them, but knew it was the sensible plan. She squeezed back through the opening they'd created, finding that the other miners had enlarged it considerably in their absence. Mr. Holloway was waiting on the other side. "He's alive," she told him, relief making her voice shake. "His leg is injured, but he can move with help." It took careful maneuvering and several painful minutes, but they managed to get Timothy through the opening. The process repeated at the first blockage, where more miners were waiting to help. The journey out of the mine was slow, with Timothy hobbling between Ethan and another miner, but to Fiona, it was a triumph. With each step closer to daylight, the weight on her chest lightened. When they finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, a cheer went up from the crowd gathered outside. Word of the rescue attempt had spread through Durango, and it seemed half the town had assembled to wait for news. The mine owners were there too. their faces a mixture of relief and concern. Fiona suspected, more for the fate of their mine than for her father. Dr. Wilson, the town physician, stepped forward immediately to examine Timothy, who was lowered carefully onto a prepared stretcher. "Let's get you to my office," the doctor said after a quick assessment. "That leg needs proper tending." As men carried the stretcher toward a waiting wagon, Fiona turned to Ethan, who was using a handkerchief to wipe dirt from his face. In the full light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably not yet 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind rather than age. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and despite the grime of the rescue, there was something undeniably handsome about his strong features. "Mr. Irwin," she said, suddenly finding it difficult to express the depth of her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." He tucked the handkerchief away. "No need for thanks, Miss Turner. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You risked your life for a man you've never met in a town where you're just passing through. That deserves more than thanks, but thanks is what I have to offer." She extended her hand. Ethan looked at her hand for a moment, then took it in his much larger one. Instead of the brief handshake she expected, he held it gently, as if it were something precious. "Seeing you reunited with your father is thanks enough," he said quietly. A throat cleared beside them, and they both turned to see Mr. Holloway, hat in hand. "Miss Turner, the wagon's ready to take your father to Dr. Wilson's." "Of course." She withdrew her hand from Ethan's, feeling oddly bereft at the loss of contact. "I should go with him." "I'll walk with you," Ethan offered, falling into step beside her as they moved toward the wagon. Timothy was already loaded into the back, propped up on blankets. His face was pale beneath the grime, but he smiled when he saw his daughter. "There's my girl," he said, reaching for her hand as she climbed up to sit beside him. "And her guardian angel." He nodded to Ethan, who stood beside the wagon. "I owe you my life, Mr. Irwin." "Just glad I could help," Ethan replied. "You rest now and heal up." As the wagon prepared to depart, Fiona looked down at Ethan. "Will you?" She began, then hesitated, unsure what she wanted to ask him. "Stay, come see me again." The question seemed too forward, too presumptuous. Ethan seemed to understand her unspoken question. "I'll check in on you both tomorrow if that's all right." Relief washed over her. "Yes, please do. We're at the Turner homestead about 2 miles east of town." "I'll find it," he promised. As the wagon pulled away, Fiona looked back at Ethan Irwin, still standing in the road with the mountains behind him. Something had changed in her world today, and it wasn't just the near loss of her father. Something had begun in that dark mine, something she couldn't yet name, but felt in the quickened beating of her heart. The Turner homestead was modest but well-maintained, with a small main house, a barn and a chicken coop nestled in a valley with the San Juan Mountains rising majestically behind it. Fiona had grown up here after her mother's death 15 years ago, raised by her father with love but little feminine guidance. Perhaps that explained her practical nature, her comfort with tasks that made other young women in Durango raise their eyebrows in dismay. After Timothy was settled in Dr. Wilson's care for the night, the doctor insisting on monitoring his patient for at least 24 hours, Fiona returned home alone. The house felt unusually empty without her father's presence. She lit lamps against the gathering dusk, built up the fire, and heated water for a much-needed bath. As she scrubbed away the dirt and grime of the mine, her mind kept returning to Ethan Irwin. Who was he? What brought him to Durango? She had seen the easy way he wore his gun, the wariness in his eyes when he first approached the mine. He wasn't an ordinary drifter, that much was clear. The next morning, Fiona rose with the sun as usual. though her body protested every movement. Muscles she didn't know she possessed ached from yesterday's exertions. Her hands were raw and blistered from hours of moving rock and debris. But there were animals to feed, eggs to collect, and then she needed to ride into town to check on her father. She had just finished milking their cow when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Ethan Irwin rode into the yard, his horse a magnificent chestnut stallion that pranced slightly as he reined it to a stop. He sat tall in the saddle, his posture revealing years of horsemanship. "Good morning, Miss Turner," he called, tipping his hat. "Mr. Irwin," she replied, setting down her milk pail and wiping her hands on her apron. "You found us. Your directions were good." He dismounted with fluid grace. "How's your father?" "Still at Dr. Wilson's. I was about to ride in to check on him." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like some coffee before we go? It's the least I can offer." Ethan tied his horse to the hitching post. "Coffee sounds good, thank you." Inside the house, Fiona busied herself with the coffee pot, oddly self-conscious under Ethan's quiet gaze. The homestead's interior was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a small sofa covered in faded chintz, and shelves lined with books. 2 doors led to separate bedrooms and a third to a small pantry. "You and your father live here alone?" Ethan asked, removing his hat and setting it on the table. "Since I was 5, Fiona confirmed, setting 2 cups on the table and pouring the coffee. "My mother died of influenza that winter." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched her. "It was a long time ago," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Father did his best to raise me right, though I'm sure I've disappointed the ladies of Durango by turning out more practical than proper." A smile curved Ethan's mouth, transforming his serious face. "I think practical is a fine quality in a woman, especially one who's willing to enter a collapsed mind to save her father." Fiona felt warmth rise in her cheeks at his approval. "You still haven't told me what brings you to Durango, Mr. Irwin." He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "I go where work takes me. I was a cavalry scout for several years after the war, then tried my hand at ranching in Wyoming. Lately, I've been doing odd jobs, some cattle driving, some prospecting, and some mine rescues," she added with a small smile. "That was a first," he admitted. "Though I've seen my share of cave-ins while prospecting. Mining's dangerous work. Father loves it, though. He says there's something about finding treasure in the earth that gets in a man's blood." "Has he always worked the silver cliff?" Fiona nodded. "Since before I was born. He was one of the original miners when they first struck silver. The mines changed hands several times since then." Her expression darkened. "The current owners care more for profit than safety." "That's often the way," Ethan said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Men sitting in offices back east making decisions that cost lives out here." They finished their coffee, and Fiona quickly changed into a clean dress more suitable for town. As they rode side by side toward Durango, she found herself studying Ethan from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His profile against the blue Colorado sky was strong, his posture alert but relaxed. "You said you were a cavalry scout," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "During the war?" "After," he replied. "I was too young for the war itself, thankfully. Scouted for the 7th Cavalry for 3 years, mostly in Kansas and Colorado territories." Fiona knew enough about the tensions between settlers and Native Americans to understand what that meant. "That must have been difficult work." Ethan's expression tightened slightly. "It was. I left after Washita River." She'd heard of the battle or massacre, depending on who told the story, where Custer's forces had attacked a Cheyenne village in 1868. She didn't press for details, sensing that the memories weren't ones he wished to revisit. Durango was bustling when they arrived. The mining town had grown rapidly in recent years, with the discovery of silver in the surrounding mountains bringing an influx of fortune seekers and the businesses that catered to them. Main Street featured several saloons, a hotel, a general store and doctor. Wilson's small medical office on the corner. They found Timothy sitting up in bed, color returned to his face and his injured leg wrapped in clean bandages. His face brightened when Fiona entered the room. "There's my girl," he said, opening his arms for a hug. "And Mr. Irwin, too. Come to check on the old man you hauled out of the ground." "How are you feeling, Mr. Turner?" Ethan asked, standing at the foot of the bed. "Better than I deserve," Timothy replied. "Doc says the leg isn't broken, just badly bruised. I'll be laid up for a few weeks, but should heal clean if I stay off it." "That's wonderful news," Fiona said, relief evident in her voice. "When can you come home?" "Dr. Wilson wants to keep him today for observation," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see a well-dressed man in his 50s, his vest stretched tight across an ample stomach. "But we could certainly arrange for Mr. Turner to convalesce at home after that." "Mr. Prescott," Timothy acknowledged, his tone cooling noticeably. "I didn't expect a visit from the mine owner himself." Harold Prescott stepped fully into the room, removing his hat. "When one of our most experienced miners is injured, it's a matter of great concern." His eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Timothy. "I understand there were complaints about the safety of the eastern shaft, complaints you ignored," Timothy said bluntly. "I reported those cracked supports 3 days ago, Mr. Prescott." "Yes, well," Prescott tugged at his waistcoat uncomfortably. "There may have been some miscommunication. Regardless, I want to assure you that all necessary repairs will be made before any miners return to that section." "And will you be paying Mr. Turner's wages while he recovers from an accident that could have been prevented?" Fiona asked, her voice steady despite her anger. Prescott looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Miss Turner, these matters of business are entirely relevant to my father's situation," she finished for him. "He was injured while trying to document safety concerns that you chose to ignore." Ethan watched the exchange with interest, impressed by Fiona's directness. Most women would defer to a man of Prescott's standing in the community, regardless of the circumstances. Prescott cleared his throat. "Yes. Well, the company will certainly provide some compensation during Mr. Turner's recovery. Half wages, perhaps, for a month." "Half wages for 2 months would be more appropriate," Timothy countered, "considering I warned you this could happen." The mine owner's face reddened slightly, but after a glance at Ethan, whose steady gaze seemed to unnerve him, he nodded. "Very well. Half wages for 2 months, and your position will be waiting when you're fit to return." He replaced his hat. "I wish you a speedy recovery, Turner." After Prescott left, Timothy let out a long breath. Never thought I'd see him agree to that. Man's tighter with $1 than a tick on a hound. "I think Mr. Irwin's presence may have influenced his generosity," Fiona observed with a small smile in Ethan's direction. Mr. Prescott seemed quite eager to conclude the negotiation. Ethan shrugged modestly. "I didn't say a word." "Sometimes a man's reputation speaks for him," Timothy said, studying Ethan with new interest. "Word gets around about a former cavalry scout who stands up for what's right. Doctor." Wilson entered then to check on his patient, and Fiona and Ethan stepped outside to give them privacy. They stood on the boardwalk in front of the doctor's office, watching the town's activity. "Would you join me for lunch at the hotel?" Ethan asked suddenly. You must be hungry, and I'd like to hear more about Durango." The invitation surprised her, but Fiona found herself nodding. "I'd like that." The Grand Hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Durango, with white tablecloths and actual glass windows overlooking Main Street. Fiona was acutely aware that her simple dress marked her as out of place among the few other diners, who were clearly travelers or business people rather than locals. Ethan, however, seemed unconcerned with appearances as he held her chair for her. "Order whatever you'd like," he said. "I haven't had a proper meal in days." Over roast beef and potatoes, they talked. Ethan told her of his travels through the Western Territories, of magnificent landscapes and frontier towns, of the characters he'd encountered. Fiona shared stories of growing up in Durango, of learning to ride and shoot alongside her father, of her mother's books that had given her an education beyond what the small town school could offer. "You're different from other women I've met," Ethan observed as they finished their meal. "Is that good or bad?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Good," he said without hesitation. "Very good." The warmth in his blue eyes made something flutter in her chest. For a moment, she wondered what it would be like to know this man better, to have him look at her that way every day. Then she reminded herself that he was, by his own admission, someone who never stayed in one place for long. After lunch, they returned to Dr. Wilson's to find Timothy dozing. The doctor assured them he was doing well and could return home the following day. "I should stay in town tonight," Fiona said as they left the doctor's office. "Father might need something." "I'm sure Mrs. Wilson will look after him," Ethan said, referring to the doctor's wife who helped tend patients. "But if you prefer to stay, I understand." She hesitated, torn between duty to her father and the desire to return home where chores awaited. "I suppose you're right. The animals need tending, and I should prepare the house for Father's return." "I'll ride back with you," Ethan offered, "and I can help with those chores if you'll allow it." Fiona started to decline automatically. She was used to managing on her own but stopped herself. "That's very kind. Thank you." The ride back to the homestead was companionable, with Ethan pointing out features of the landscape that most people would overlook, signs of deer passing through, the best places for trout in the creek that ran near the road, which distant peaks had the earliest snow in autumn. His knowledge of the natural world impressed her. "You notice things others don't," she observed. "Had to, as a scout," he replied. "Noticing details can be the difference between life and death out here." At the homestead, they worked together easily as if they'd done it many times before. Ethan repaired a loose board on the chicken coop, while Fiona fed the animals. Together they stacked firewood near the house in preparation for the evening's chill. The mountains brought cool nights even in summer. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Fiona invited Ethan to stay for supper. She prepared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and the last of the ham from their smokehouse. They ate at the kitchen table, the window open to catch the evening breeze that carried the scent of pine and sage. "This is good," Ethan said, savoring a bite of biscuit with honey. "Been a while since I had home cooking." "It's nothing special," Fiona demurred, though pleased by his appreciation. "Just simple fare." "Simple is underrated," he replied, his eyes meeting hers across the table, "especially when it's made by someone who cares." After supper, they sat on the porch as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Fiona found herself telling Ethan about her mother, how she'd loved books and music, how she'd taught Fiona to read by the age of 4, how she dreamed of someday visiting San Francisco. "Father never remarried," she concluded. "Said he'd had his one great love and that was enough for any man's lifetime." "Your parents were fortunate," Ethan said quietly. Many people never find that kind of love at all. Have you? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted its boldness. But Ethan didn't seem offended. No, he answered honestly. Moving around as I do doesn't lend itself to putting down those kinds of roots. Is that what you want, to keep moving? He was silent for a long moment, looking out at the darkened valley. It's what I know, he finally said. Been doing it so long, I'm not sure I'd know how to stop. There was something in his voice, a hint of wistfulness, perhaps that made Fiona wonder if the wandering life was truly his choice or simply a habit he couldn't break. But before she could pursue the thought, Ethan stood. I should go. It's getting late and you need your rest after yesterday. He put on his hat. Would you like me to come by tomorrow to help bring your father home? Yes, please, she said, rising as well. If it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. He hesitated a moment, as if wanting to say something more, then simply tipped his hat and walked to his horse. Fiona watched him ride away, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, and felt an unexpected sense of loss. The next morning, Ethan arrived as promised, and together they rode into Durango to collect Timothy. The doctor provided detailed instructions for care of the injured leg, along with a jar of salve for the bruising and a packet of willow bark for pain. Getting Timothy home was a challenge. They borrowed a wagon with a bed of straw for comfort, but every bump in the road made him wince despite his attempts to hide his discomfort. Once at the homestead, Ethan carried Timothy inside as if he weighed nothing, settling him carefully in his bed. There, Ethan said, stepping back. Doctor's orders are to stay off that leg for at least 2 weeks, Mr. Turner. Call me Timothy, Fiona's father replied. After pulling a man from a mine, I think you've earned first-name privileges. Ethan smiled. Timothy, then, and I'm Ethan. Fiona brought her father a cup of tea and arranged pillows to prop his leg. You'll need to be patient, father. No sneaking out to the barn when I'm not looking. My daughter knows me too well, Timothy told Ethan with a rueful smile. Never could fool her, even when she was knee-high to a grasshopper. A valuable quality in a daughter, Ethan replied, his eyes meeting Fiona's with warmth that made her cheeks flush. Timothy didn't miss the look that passed between them. Ethan, where are you staying in Durango? The boarding house on Pine Street. It's not fancy, but it's clean. Nonsense, Timothy declared. We have a perfectly good barn with a comfortable loft. You're welcome to stay here while you're in town. He glanced at his daughter. That is, if Fiona doesn't object. Of course not, she said quickly, perhaps too quickly. It's the least we can offer after what you did for us. Ethan looked between father and daughter. That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Timothy insisted. Besides, I'd rest easier knowing there's a man on the property while I'm laid up. We get the occasional drifter through these parts, and Fiona's here alone all day while I'm usually at the mine. Ethan considered this, then nodded. All right, thank you. I'll get my things from town this afternoon. And so began a new rhythm to life at the Turner homestead. Ethan moved his few possessions into the barn loft, insisting it was more than comfortable for a man used to sleeping under the stars. During the day, he helped with chores that were difficult for Fiona to manage alone, repairing fence posts, chopping extra firewood, breaking a new garden patch for fall planting. In the evenings, he would join them for supper, and afterward they would sit together while Timothy told stories of the early days in Durango or Ethan shared tales from his travels. As days stretched into a week, Fiona found herself watching the clock in anticipation of Ethan's return from whatever task had taken him away from the homestead. She caught herself paying extra attention to her appearance before supper, pinching color into her cheeks and ensuring her hair was neatly arranged. And sometimes, She would look up to find Ethan watching her, his blue eyes thoughtful and warm. Timothy observed all this with a father's perceptiveness, saying nothing but noting how his daughter bloomed in Ethan's presence. He had worried about Fiona over the years, concerned that her practical nature and isolated upbringing might leave her without the prospect of a family of her own. Most local young men were intimidated by her independence and intelligence, but Ethan Irwin seemed to appreciate exactly those qualities that made Fiona unique. On Sunday, they all attended church in town, Timothy insisting he was well enough for the outing if they took the wagon. After the service, many townspeople approached to inquire about his recovery and to meet Ethan, whose role in the mine rescue had made him something of a local hero. "You're quite popular," Fiona observed as they made their way back to the wagon, having finally extracted themselves from well-wishers. "Not used to that," Ethan admitted. "Usually try to keep a low profile." "Why is that?" she asked, curious about this aspect of his character. He shrugged, helping her onto the wagon seat. "Just prefer it that way. Attention can complicate things." Before she could ask what he meant, they were approached by Harold Prescott and his daughter, Amelia, a fashionably dressed young woman who regarded Fiona's simple Sunday dress with barely concealed disdain. "Turner, good to see you up and about," Prescott greeted Timothy, who was already settled in the back of the wagon. "And Mr. Irwin, the man of the hour, I understand you're quite experienced in mining operations." "I've done some prospecting," Ethan replied cautiously. "Nothing extensive." "Nevertheless, I'd like to discuss a proposition with you. The Silvercliff could use a man with your diverse skills. Perhaps you could stop by my office tomorrow." Ethan glanced at Fiona, then back to Prescott. "I can do that." "Excellent, say 10 o'clock. Prescott didn't wait for confirmation before turning to his daughter. "Amelia, have you met Mr. Irwin? He's the one who organized the rescue at the mine." "I haven't had the pleasure," Amelia said, extending a gloved hand with a smile that transformed her previously aloof expression. "How exciting to meet a genuine hero." Ethan took her hand briefly. "Miss Prescott, but I'm no hero, just happened to be in the right place." "So modest," she said, her smile widening. "Father is hosting a small gathering at our home this Friday evening. You simply must attend." "That's kind, but I'm helping the Turners while Mr. Turner recovers," Ethan said. "Oh, but surely they can spare you for one evening." Amelia's gaze flicked dismissively toward Fiona. "It would be an opportunity to meet some of Durango's more established residents." Fiona felt a stab of something uncomfortable at the way Amelia looked at Ethan as if he were a prize to be claimed. She was surprised by the intensity of her reaction. "Thank you for the invitation, Miss Prescott," Ethan said politely. "I'll consider it." As they drove away, Timothy chuckled from the back of the wagon. "Seems Amelia Prescott has set her cap for you, Ethan. Her father's been trying to marry her off to every eligible bachelor who passes through Durango." "I'm hardly eligible," Ethan replied, his hand steady on the reins. "Just a drifter with no fixed address." "But you're also a hero now," Fiona pointed out, trying to keep her tone light despite the churning in her stomach. "And heroes are always eligible." Ethan glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Some heroes aren't what they appear to be." The cryptic comment hung in the air between them for the rest of the ride home. That evening, Ethan was quieter than usual during supper, and afterward, he excused himself early to tend to the horses. Fiona found him in the barn, brushing his chestnut stallion with long, methodical strokes. She hesitated in the doorway, watching him for a moment. There was something soothing in the rhythm of his movements, in the careful attention he paid to the animal. "His coat gleams like copper in this light," she said, stepping fully into the barn. Ethan looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. Ajax is vain, likes to look his best, she approached, reaching out to stroke the horse's nose. Ajax, from the Greek hero. My mother was a school teacher, Ethan explained. She read us Homer when we were young, the name stuck with me. Us, my brother and me. Something flickered in his eyes. He's gone now. I'm sorry, Fiona said softly, understanding that gone didn't mean merely absent. Ethan nodded once in acknowledgement, then resumed brushing. Are you planning to accept Mr. Prescott's job offer? She asked after a moment. I haven't decided. His focus remained on the horse. Depends what he's offering, I suppose. And the party. Will you attend that? Now Ethan did look at her, his brushing paused. Would it bother you if I did? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Why would it? She countered, not quite answering. Fiona. He set the brush down and stepped around the horse to stand before her. I'm not interested in Amelia Prescott or her father's social gatherings. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by embarrassment at how transparent her feelings must be. You don't owe me any explanations, Ethan. Maybe not. He took a step closer, but I'd like to give them anyway. The air between them seemed to change, becoming charged with something unspoken. Fiona was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of hay and horses and the soap he used. His eyes held hers, intent and searching. Why did you come to Durango? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's expression turned serious. Truth is, I was tracking someone. A man who robbed a bank in Denver. Trail led here. This revelation startled her. You're a lawman. No, just someone who was in the wrong place at the right time. I was in that bank when it was robbed, saw the man who did it. Later heard he'd killed a teller in another robbery. Decided someone needed to stop him. That's dangerous work, Fiona said, concern evident in her voice. It's what I know how to do, he replied simply. But I lost his trail when I stopped to help at the mine. By now, he could be anywhere. Do you regret it? Helping us instead of continuing your hunt? Ethan's hand came up to touch her cheek gently. Not for a second. The touch of his fingers on her skin sent warmth spreading through her. Fiona knew she should step back, maintain propriety, but she couldn't make herself move away from him. I should go in, she said, though she made no motion to leave. Father will wonder where I am. Probably, Ethan agreed, though his hand remained on her cheek. Fiona. A noise from outside, the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching made them both turn toward the barn door. Ethan's posture changed instantly, tension replacing the warmth of a moment before. He moved to the door, peering out into the gathering dusk. Stay here, he instructed, his voice low. He took his gun belt from where it hung on a peg and buckled it on with practiced ease. Ethan, what is it? Alarm rose in her as she watched him check his revolver. Probably nothing, he said, though his actions belied his words. But 3 riders at this hour, coming fast. Just stay inside. He stepped out of the barn, and Fiona moved to the door to watch as he walked toward the house. The riders came into view, 3 men on dusty horses, slowing as they approached the homestead. Fiona couldn't make out their faces in the failing light, but something about their posture made her uneasy. She saw Ethan stop in the yard, his stance casual but alert, his right hand resting near his holster. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting, then dismounted. The other 2 remained on their horses, positioned slightly behind the first man. Though she couldn't hear the conversation, Fiona could see the lead rider gesturing as he spoke, occasionally pointing toward the mountains. Ethan's responses appeared brief, his posture remaining guarded. After several minutes, the rider remounted, tipped his hat, and the 3 men turned their horses and rode away. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Ethan's posture relax. He stood watching the direction they had gone for a long moment before returning to the barn. Who were they? Fiona asked as soon as he entered. Said they were prospectors looking for directions to Silverton, Ethan replied, though something in his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe their story. Seemed in an awful hurry for men who'd lost their way, though. You think they might be connected to the man you're looking for? Ethan shook his head. Not likely, but it pays to be cautious. He removed his gun belt and hung it back on the peg. I'll walk you to the house. As they crossed the yard together, Ethan kept a watchful eye on the surrounding darkness. At the door, he paused. Lock this behind you. I'll keep watch for a while, make sure those men don't circle back. You think they might? Alarm tightened her chest. Probably not, he reassured her. But I've lived this long by not taking chances. His eyes softened as they met hers. Get some rest, Fiona. Everything's fine. She wanted to believe him, but something in his manner, a tension that hadn't been there before, made her doubt his words. Still, she nodded. Good night, Ethan. Good night. Inside, she found her father dozing in his chair by the fire. The sound of the door closing roused him. There you are, he said, stifling a yawn. Was beginning to wonder if you'd run off with our handsome boarder. Father, she chided, though she couldn't help the blush that rose to her cheeks. I was just helping with the horses. Timothy's knowing smile suggested he didn't entirely believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Did I hear riders a few minutes ago? Just some prospectors asking for directions, she said, deciding not to worry him with Ethan's suspicions. Nothing important. As she helped her father to bed, Fiona's mind kept returning to the moment in the barn before the riders arrived. What had Ethan been about to say? And why did it feel like something important had been interrupted outside? Ethan circled the property, checking that the prospectors had truly departed and hadn't left anyone behind. Something about the men had struck him as off, their clothing too fine, their hands too smooth for men who worked the earth for a living. And the leader's eyes had been too interested in the layout of the homestead, in the distance to the nearest neighbors. Ethan had spent too many years reading danger to ignore his instincts now. Someone was coming, maybe not tonight, but soon. And when they did, he would be ready. The next morning, Ethan rode into town for his meeting with Harold Prescott. Fiona spent the morning tending to her father and catching up on household chores, but her mind kept wandering to thoughts of Ethan. She found herself watching the road for his return, anticipation building with each hour that passed. When he finally appeared in the early afternoon, she had to restrain herself from rushing out to meet him. Instead, she continued hanging laundry on the line, pretending not to notice his approach until he was nearly upon her. "How was your meeting?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she pinned a sheet to the line. "Interesting," Ethan replied, dismounting and tying Ajax to the fence. "Prescott wants me to become some kind of security manager for the mine. Says they've had trouble with claim jumpers and thefts." "And will you take the position?" She kept her eyes on the laundry, afraid her expression might reveal too much of her feelings. Told him I needed to think about it. Ethan leaned against the fence post. It would mean staying in Durango. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Fiona finally looked at him directly. "Is that something you're considering, staying?" "I didn't used to be," he admitted. "But lately, I've been thinking there might be reasons to stop drifting." Before she could ask what those reasons might be, Timothy called from the porch where he'd been sitting in the sun, his injured leg propped on a stool. "Ethan, come tell me what that scoundrel Prescott tried to bribe you with." The moment broken, they walked together to the porch. As Ethan recounted his meeting, Fiona noticed how comfortable he seemed here, how naturally he fit into their lives. It was as if he had always belonged at the Turner homestead, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her. to allow herself to believe he might stay, to hope for something permanent from a man who had spent his life in motion. It was a dangerous indulgence. That evening after supper, Timothy retired early, claiming fatigue, though Fiona suspected he was deliberately giving her and Ethan time alone. They sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars emerge as night fell over the valley. "Those men last night," Fiona said after a comfortable silence. "You were concerned about them." Ethan nodded, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. Something wasn't right. Their story made sense, but they were too interested in this place. "Do you think they'll come back? Maybe. I'll keep watch." He turned to look at her directly. "Fiona, there's something I should tell you. The man I've been tracking, his name is James Blackwood. He's dangerous, and if he's in this area..." "You're worried he might find you here," she finished for him. "I'm worried he might decide to use you or your father to get to me," Ethan corrected. "If those riders were connected to him somehow, it might be better if I moved on, drew him away from here." The thought of Ethan leaving sent a jolt of panic through her. "No," she said, more forcefully than she'd intended. "I mean, we're safer with you here than without you. Are you?" His voice was quiet, troubled. "Or am I just bringing danger to your door, Ethan?" She reached out, placing her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." He turned his hand to clasp hers, his fingers warm and strong. "You're remarkable, Fiona Turner. Most women would be packing their bags at the mere mention of danger." "I'm not most women," she reminded him with a small smile. "No," he agreed, his eyes holding hers in the dim light. "You're not." This time, when he leaned toward her, there were no interruptions. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss, a question more than a demand. Fiona answered by moving closer, her free hand coming up to rest on his shoulder. The kiss deepened, becoming something more than a tentative exploration, a promise perhaps, or a beginning. When they finally parted, Ethan kept her hand in his. "I should have asked permission first," he said, though he didn't sound particularly repentant. "Would you have stopped if I'd said no?" She asked, a little breathless. "Immediately," he assured her. "But I'm glad you didn't." Fiona laughed softly. "So am I." Then, more seriously, "What happens now, Ethan?" He was silent for a moment, considering. "I don't know," he admitted. "This wasn't in my plans. You weren't in my plans." "Life seldom follows our plans," she observed. "Father always says that's what makes it interesting. Your father is a wise man." Ethan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I should speak with him about my intentions. If I'm going to court his daughter properly, I should ask his permission first." The formal declaration surprised and delighted her. "Court me? Ethan Irwin, are you planning to stay in Durango?" "I'm considering it," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half smile. "Seems there might be something worth staying for." Before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention, the same rhythmic cadence of multiple horses approaching that they had heard the previous night. "Inside," Ethan said, his demeanor changing instantly. "Lock the door and get your father's shotgun." "Ethan, now, Fiona." His voice brooked no argument. "And stay away from the windows." She hurried inside, her heart pounding. Her father was already awake, sitting up in bed with alarm clear on his face. "Riders coming," she explained, retrieving the shotgun from its place over the door and checking that it was loaded. "Ethan thinks they might be trouble." "The same ones from last night?" Timothy asked, reaching for his crutch to leverage himself out of bed. "I don't know." Fiona moved to help him. "Stay here, father, you can't fight with that leg." "I'm not letting you face danger alone," he insisted, though he grimaced with pain as he stood. "I'm not alone," she reminded him. "Ethan's out there." Through the window, they could see Ethan standing in the yard, his revolver drawn but held low at his side as 5 riders approached, the 3 from the previous night plus 2 more. They stopped at a distance, and the same man as before dismounted. Ethan remained where he was, making no move to approach the newcomers. "I can't hear what they're saying," Fiona murmured, straining to catch any words through the closed window. The conversation appeared tense, with the dismounted man gesturing emphatically while Ethan remained still, his responses brief. Then suddenly, everything changed. The man reached for his gun, but Ethan was faster. His revolver came up in a fluid motion, firing before the other man could clear his holster. The man fell, and chaos erupted. The remaining riders drew their weapons, but Ethan was already moving, diving for cover behind the water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. He returned fire, his aim deadly accurate even in the dim light. One rider toppled from his horse, then another. The remaining two wheeled their mounts and retreated, firing wildly as they fled. One of their bullets shattered the window beside Fiona, sending glass fragments flying. Timothy pulled her down, shielding her with his body despite his injured leg. "Stay down," he ordered, taking the shotgun from her shaking hands. Outside, Ethan fired twice more at the retreating riders, then approached the fallen men cautiously, his gun still ready. After checking each one, he hurried toward the house. "Fiona, Timothy," he called, worry evident in his voice. "We're all right," Fiona answered, rising from her protective crouch. She opened the door to find Ethan on the porch, his face taut with concern. "What happened? Who were they?" "Blackwood's men," Ethan confirmed grimly. "They weren't subtle about it this time, said their boss wanted to talk to me about Denver." He looked past her to Timothy. "Are you hurt?" "Just jarred my bad leg," Timothy assured him. "What about the men out there? 2 dead, 1 wounded." "The other 2 ran." Ethan's expression was grim. "The wounded one confirmed they work for Blackwood. He's in Durango." "Then we need to alert the sheriff," Fiona said. Ethan shook his head. "Sheriff Watkins is in Blackwood's pocket, has been for months, according to this fellow. That's why Blackwood chose Durango. He has protection here." "What do we do?" Timothy asked, leaning heavily on his crutch. "You two need to leave," Ethan said decisively. "It's not safe here now. They know where to find you and they'll use you to get to me. Leave our home," Fiona protested. "Where would we go?" "My sister lives in Pueblo," Timothy suggested. "We could stay with her until this is resolved." Ethan nodded. "That's good. Pack only what you need. I'll hitch the wagon and take care of the man outside." While Fiona and Timothy gathered essentials, clothing, food, Timothy's medication, and the small strongbox containing their savings and important papers, Ethan dealt with the aftermath of the gunfight. The wounded man was bound and gagged, to be delivered to the nearest honest lawman they could find. The dead were laid out respectfully at the edge of the property. Within the hour, they were ready to depart. Ethan helped Timothy into the wagon bed, which had been padded with blankets for the journey. "What about you?" Fiona asked as Ethan handed her up to the driver's seat. "Are you coming with us?" "No," he said, his expression resolute. "I need to end this. Blackwood won't stop coming after me, which means he won't stop being a danger to you." Fear clutched at her heart. "That's exactly why you should come with us. We're stronger together." "And I'd lead him straight to you," Ethan countered. "This is my fight, Fiona. I need to finish it. By confronting a man who has the sheriff in his pocket, who has hired guns at his disposal," she shook her head vehemently. "That's suicide, Ethan." "I've faced worse odds," he assured her, though his confidence didn't ease her fear. "I know what I'm doing." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "What about everything you said earlier?" Ethan's expression softened. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "I meant every word, and when this is over I'll come for you, I promise." "How will you find us?" "I was a scout, remember. Finding people is what I do." He managed a smile, though his eyes remained serious. Just keep your father safe." "I'll handle Blackwood." From the wagon bed, Timothy spoke up. "Ethan, don't be a hero. A smart retreat is sometimes the better part of valor." "I appreciate the advice," Ethan replied, "but Blackwood won't stop. He's killed before and he'll kill again if someone doesn't stop him." "And that someone has to be you?" Fiona asked, her fear turning to frustration. "Yes," Ethan said simply. "It does." Before she could argue further, he handed her the reins. "Follow the south road toward Pueblo. Don't stop until you've crossed the county line. There's a town called Brighton Falls. The sheriff there is a good man named Parker. Tell him what happened here." "Ethan, please, I'll find you," he repeated. "Trust me." With that, he stepped back from the wagon. Fiona wanted to jump down to argue more, to persuade him to come with them, but she knew that stubborn set of his jaw. He had made his decision. "Be careful," she said instead, her voice thick with emotion. "Remember, you have a promise to keep." Ethan nodded once. "Drive safely, and Fiona." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Before she could respond, he slapped the horse's rumps, and the wagon lurched forward. Fiona had no choice but to focus on the reins and the dark road ahead, though tears blurred her vision. When she finally looked back, Ethan was still standing in the yard, a solitary figure watching them depart. "He's a good man," Timothy said from behind her. "Stubborn as the day is long, but good." "And he might get himself killed because of it," Fiona replied, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Have faith, daughter," her father advised gently. "Men like Ethan Irwin are hard to kill." The journey to Pueblo was long and arduous, especially for Timothy, whose injured leg suffered from the constant jolting of the wagon despite the padding. They stopped only when necessary, pushing on through the night as Ethan had instructed. By dawn, they had reached Brighton Falls, a small settlement with a single street of businesses including a sheriff's office. Sheriff Parker was a graying man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened to their story without interruption, nodding occasionally as Fiona explained about the mine collapse, Ethan's help, and finally the attack at their homestead. "I know James Blackwood by reputation," he said when she'd finished. "Nasty piece of work. Robs banks, but he's branched out into other enterprises, protection rackets, gambling, even controlling mining claims through intimidation. And Sheriff Watkins in Durango is working with him." Timothy asked from the chair where he sat, his leg propped on a stool. "Wouldn't surprise me," Parker admitted. "Watkins has always had flexible ethics where money's concerned." He looked at Fiona directly. "Your friend Ethan is taking on a dangerous man with powerful connections. Can you help him?" she asked, hope kindling. Sheriff Parker considered this. "I can't ride into Durango and arrest a man on another sheriff's turf without cause, no matter what I suspect. But I can send a wire to the federal marshal's office in Denver. They've been building a case against Blackwood for months." "How long will that take?" Fiona pressed. "Ethan could be facing Blackwood right now. Marshals could be here in 2 days, maybe 3. Parker's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "I'm sorry, Miss Turner, that's the best I can do officially." "And unofficially?" Timothy asked shrewdly. A slight smile crossed the sheriff's weathered face. "Well, I'm due for a visit to my sister in Durango. Been promising to see her for months now. Might as well head that way today, see what's happening in town." Relief flooded Fiona. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "I'm just one man and Blackwood has numbers on his side." He stood, reaching for his hat. "You two should continue to Pueblo as planned. I'll find you there when this is resolved one way or another." "I'm coming with you," Fiona declared, rising from her chair. Both men stared at her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Timothy said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "Father, I can't just run away while Ethan faces this alone." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "He risked his life to save you. I won't abandon him now." "Fiona, I'm going," she said with finality, "either with Sheriff Parker or on my own." Timothy looked to the sheriff for support, but Parker merely shrugged. "She's determined, Mr. Turner, and truth be told, I could use another pair of eyes in Durango." "Then I'm coming too," Timothy declared, attempting to stand. "No, you're not," Fiona countered, gently pressing him back into his chair. "Your leg needs proper rest. Aunt Martha will look after you in Pueblo." The argument continued for some time, but in the end, Fiona's determination won out. It was agreed that Timothy would continue to Pueblo with a deputy as escort, while Fiona would accompany Sheriff Parker back to Durango. "Be careful, daughter," Timothy said as they parted, his face creased with worry. "Your mother would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you." "Nothing will happen," she assured him, though her confidence was mostly for his benefit. "I'll be back before you know it with Ethan." The journey back to Durango was tense, with Sheriff Parker filling Fiona in on what they might expect. Blackwood usually travels with at least 4 men, all armed and experienced. If he's got Watkins in his pocket, he'll be operating openly in town. What about Ethan? How will we find him? If he's smart, he'll be lying low, gathering information before making a move. Parker glanced at her. "Your Ethan, he's not the type to rush in without a plan, is he?" "He's not my Ethan," Fiona corrected automatically, though her cheeks warmed. "And no, he's careful, methodical." "Good. That improves his chances considerably." They reached Durango by late afternoon, taking a room at a small hotel on the edge of town, rather than the more prominent Grand Hotel where Blackwood might have men watching. Sheriff Parker changed into plain clothes, removing his badge and anything that might identify him as a lawman. "First step is reconnaissance," he told Fiona. "We need to locate Blackwood and determine how many men he has with him. Then we find Ethan." "How do we do that without being spotted?" Fiona asked. Parker smiled. "You'd be surprised how invisible a young woman and an older man can be in a busy town. No one pays us much attention." He was right. As they strolled casually down Main Street, no one gave them a second glance. They were just another father and daughter doing errands, unremarkable, forgettable. They checked the saloons first, where Blackwood was most likely to establish himself, but found no sign of him or Ethan. It was at the Grand Hotel that they finally got a lead. As they passed by, Fiona recognized Harold Prescott exiting with a well-dressed stranger, a man with a tailored suit and a gold watch chain. His dark hair slicked back beneath an expensive hat. Something about his confident stride and the deferential way Prescott treated him raised Fiona's suspicions. "That might be him," she whispered to Parker. "The one with Prescott." Parker nodded slightly. "Let's follow, but keep your distance." They trailed the 2 men to the Silver Cliff Mining Company office. After Prescott and the stranger entered, Parker positioned them at the window of the general store across the street, pretending to examine goods while actually watching the office. "What do you think they're discussing?" Fiona asked quietly. "Nothing good," Parker replied. "If that's Blackwood and he's meeting with the mine owner, there's more happening here than just a vendetta against Ethan." They maintained their vigil until dusk, when Prescott and the stranger finally emerged. This time, they were joined by Sheriff Watkins' confirmation, if they needed it, that the lawman was indeed compromised. The 3 men walked together toward the saloon, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. "We need to get closer," Parker decided. "Hear what they're planning." "How?" Fiona asked. "They'll recognize me, and 3 men together will notice if we're following them." Parker considered this. "Not if we give them something else to look at." He glanced at her apologetically. I hate to suggest this, Miss Turner, but sometimes a distraction is necessary. Understanding dawned. You want me to pretend to be one of those women? Her cheeks flamed at the mere thought. No, no, Parker hastily corrected. Just a friendly young lady having a drink. You sit at the bar, I'll take a table near theirs. Between us, we might overhear something useful. The plan made Fiona deeply uncomfortable, but she reminded herself what was at stake. All right, she agreed reluctantly. But if Mr. Prescott recognizes me, you slip out immediately, Parker finished for her, and we try something else. The Golden Nugget Saloon was crowded when they entered, the piano player pounding out a lively tune while miners and cowboys drank away the day's earnings. A few women in gaudy dresses circulated among the tables, but most patrons were men unwinding after work. Fiona felt painfully conspicuous as she made her way to the bar, aware of curious glances directed her way. Parker took a table near the back, where Prescott, Watkins, and the presumed Blackwood were deep in conversation. Fiona ordered a sarsaparilla, earning a raised eyebrow from the bartender but no comment. She sipped slowly, trying to appear casual while straining to hear any snippet of conversation over the piano and general noise. She nearly choked on her drink when a familiar figure slipped through the batwing doors. Ethan, his hat pulled low over his eyes, a day's growth of beard darkening his jaw. He moved toward the bar, positioning himself several stools away from Fiona but with a clear view of the table where Blackwood sat. Ethan ordered whiskey, his eyes never leaving the trio in the corner. He hadn't noticed Fiona yet, and she debated whether to alert him to her presence. Before she could decide, the bartender slid a glass toward him, and his gaze shifted momentarily, landing directly on her. His surprise was evident only in the slight widening of his eyes and the tightening of his hand around his glass. To his credit, he gave no other sign of recognition, returning his attention to his drink as if she were a stranger. But Fiona could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled anger in the set of his jaw. Across the room, Sheriff Parker had positioned himself where he could listen to the conversation at Blackwood's table. He appeared to be nursing a beer, his posture relaxed, but Fiona could tell he was alert to every word being exchanged. Minutes passed in this tense tableau, Ethan at the bar pretending not to know Fiona, Parker eavesdropping on Blackwood, and Fiona herself trying to appear as if she belonged in a saloon. Then, suddenly, everything changed. One of the men who had fled the Turner homestead entered the saloon, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Blackwood's table. He hurried over, bending to whisper something in Blackwood's ear. Blackwood's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as they scanned the room and locked on Ethan. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Blackwood smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured to the men positioned around the saloon, men Fiona hadn't even noticed until they began to close in on Ethan. "Irwin," Blackwood called, his voice carrying over the sudden hush in the room. "I've been looking for you." Ethan turned slowly, his back to the bar, his posture deceptively casual. "Found me, didn't you? Though your boys didn't fare so well when they came calling last night." "A misunderstanding," Blackwood replied smoothly. "They were simply delivering an invitation to meet. Some of them can be overzealous." "Is that what you call attempting murder these days? An invitation?" Ethan's voice was calm, but Fiona could see his right hand hovering near his holster. The piano player stopped abruptly, and patrons began to edge toward the doors, sensing the coming violence. Sheriff Watkins stood, moving to flank Blackwood. "Mr. Irwin, I suggest you come peacefully. There are questions about a disturbance at the Turner place last night." "Questions about your deputized friends trying to kill me?" Ethan asked, his gaze shifting briefly to Watkins. Interesting approach to law enforcement, Sheriff. Now, see here, Watkins began, but Blackwood raised a hand to silence him. Let's dispense with the pretense, Blackwood said, his false affability dropping away. You've been a thorn in my side since Denver, Irwin, following me, interfering with my business. It ends tonight. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Fiona saw Sheriff Parker rise from his table, moving casually toward a position where he could intervene. She remained frozen at the bar, uncertain what to do. If she revealed her connection to Ethan, she would become a target too. It does end tonight, Ethan agreed, his blue eyes hard as steel. But not the way you're thinking, Blackwood. You're outnumbered, Blackwood pointed out, gesturing to the men surrounding Ethan. And the law is on my side in this town. Bought and paid for, Ethan replied with a glance at Watkins, whose face reddened. But even corrupt badges have to answer to someone eventually. That was when Sheriff Parker made his move. Drawing his concealed revolver, he stepped into the open space between the tables. James Blackwood, he announced in a carrying voice. I'm Sheriff Daniel Parker from Brighton Falls. You're wanted for questioning in connection with bank robberies in Denver, Colorado Springs, and 3 other towns. Blackwood's composure faltered for the first time. What is this? He demanded, glaring at Watkins. You said this territory was secure. It was. Watkins protested, looking bewildered at Parker's appearance. I don't know who this man is, but he's exactly who he says he is, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see 3 men entering, each wearing the unmistakable star of a federal marshal. And we've been building a case against you for months, Blackwood. The lead marshal stepped forward. James Blackwood, you're under arrest for bank robbery, murder, and conspiracy. Sheriff Watkins, you're also under arrest for corruption and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Chaos erupted. Blackwood's men drew their weapons, and gunfire exploded across the saloon. Fiona dove behind the bar as bullets shattered bottles and splintered wood. She heard shouts, more gunshots, the crash of overturning tables. When she dared to peek over the edge of the bar, she saw Ethan engaged in a desperate struggle with Blackwood himself. They had both lost their guns in the melee and were fighting hand to hand, crashing into tables and chairs. Around them, Marshals and Parker were subduing Blackwood's men, while Prescott cowered under a table, his hands over his head. Ethan and Blackwood slammed into the bar beside Fiona, neither man seeing her as they grappled for dominance. Blackwood had a knife now, its blade flashing as he slashed at Ethan, who barely evaded the lethal edge. They were evenly matched in size and strength, but Blackwood fought with the desperation of a man facing the gallows. The knife came down again, and this time Ethan wasn't quite fast enough. The blade sliced across his ribs, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. He stumbled back, his hand pressing against the wound, and Blackwood advanced with a triumphant smile. Without thinking, Fiona grabbed a whiskey bottle from the shelf behind the bar and smashed it across the back of Blackwood's head. He crumpled instantly, the knife clattering to the floor beside him. Ethan stared at her in amazement, his breathing ragged. Fiona. What are you, saving your life, apparently, she replied, her own voice unsteady as reaction set in. Are you badly hurt? He glanced down at his side where blood was spreading across his shirt. Just a cut, nothing serious. Then his expression hardened. You were supposed to be in Pueblo. Safe. And you were supposed to be careful, she countered. This didn't look like being careful to me. Around them, the fighting had subsided. The marshals had Blackwood's men in custody, and Parker was reading Watkins his rights while the corrupt sheriff protested his innocence. Blackwood himself was being hauled to his feet, still dazed from Fiona's improvised weapon. You have no idea what you've done, girl, Blackwood snarled as he was led past them, blood trickling down his neck from the blow to his head. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," the marshal holding him said firmly. "You're finished in Colorado, Blackwood." As the prisoners were led away, Ethan finally allowed himself to lean against the bar, his hand still pressed to his side. Now that the danger had passed, the adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, and with it went his strength. Fiona moved to support him, her arm around his waist. "You need a doctor," she said, noticing how pale he had become. "Just need to sit for a minute," he insisted, though he didn't resist when she guided him to a chair. Sheriff Parker approached, tucking his revolver back into its holster. "That was closer than I like," he observed dryly. "Good thing the marshals arrived when they did." "How did they get here so fast?" Fiona asked. "You said it would be days." "I may have sent that wire before we ever met," Parker admitted with a small smile. "Had my suspicions about Blackwood being in the area for a while now. Your story just confirmed it." He looked at Ethan. "You took a big risk coming after him alone, son." "Wasn't planning to confront him tonight," Ethan explained, wincing as Fiona used a clean napkin to press against his wound. "Was just gathering information when things got complicated." "Well, it's over now," Parker said. "Blackwood's going to prison for a long time, along with Sheriff Watkins and whoever else was involved in their operation." The lead marshal rejoined them after securing the prisoners. "Sheriff Parker, we'll need statements from all of you. And Mr. Irwin, there's a reward for information leading to Blackwood's capture, $500. It's yours if you want it." Ethan looked up in surprise. "I wasn't after a reward." "Nevertheless, you've earned it." The marshal tipped his hat. "We've been chasing Blackwood for over a year. Thanks to you, that chase is finally over." After the marshal departed to organize the transfer of prisoners, Fiona helped Ethan to Dr. Wilson's office to have his wound properly tended. It was, as he'd claimed, not serious, a shallow cut that required cleaning and bandaging but no stitches. "You're fortunate," Dr. Wilson said as he finished applying the bandage. "A little deeper and we'd be having a very different conversation." "I've had worse," Ethan replied, carefully pulling his torn shirt back on. "I'm sure you have," the doctor said dryly. "Just take it easy for a few days. No exertion that might reopen the wound." Outside, the night had grown cool, stars bright in the clear mountain sky. Fiona and Ethan walked slowly back toward the hotel where she and Parker had taken rooms. "Your father?" Ethan asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Is he safe?" "On his way to Pueblo with a deputy escort," she assured him. "He wanted to come back with us, but his leg wouldn't allow it." "Us, Sheriff Parker and me," she glanced at him. "I couldn't just leave you to face Blackwood alone." Ethan stopped, turning to face her fully. "You could have been killed, Fiona, if Blackwood had realized who you were." "But he didn't," she pointed out. "And now he's in custody along with his men and Sheriff Watkins. It's over, Ethan. We're safe." He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression softening. "You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Brave, stubborn, beautiful." "Stubborn," she repeated with a raised eyebrow, though she couldn't help smiling. "Incredibly stubborn," he confirmed, his own lips curving into a smile. "It's one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them, more meaningful now that it had been spoken directly rather than in the haste of a goodbye. Fiona felt her heart quicken. "You said you were falling in love with me," she recalled softly, "before you sent us away." "I am," he confirmed, his voice low and certain. "Have been since that first day in the mine when you insisted on helping dig out your father. I just didn't realize it until I nearly lost you." Fiona stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest, careful to avoid his injured side. "I thought I might never see you again." "Takes more than a bank robber to keep me from a promise," Ethan assured her, his arms encircling her waist. Especially a promise to you. This time when they kissed, there was no uncertainty, no hesitation. It was a kiss of reunion and relief, of promises kept and futures beginning. When they finally parted, Ethan kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Come back to the homestead with me," Fiona said softly. "Help me rebuild what was damaged. Stay, not just for now, but for good." "Are you proposing to me, Fiona Turner?" Ethan asked, a note of teasing in his voice despite the seriousness of the question. "I might be," she replied with equal parts boldness and vulnerability. "Would you accept if I were?" His answer was another kiss, this one deeper and more certain than the last. "Yes," he said when they finally broke apart, "though I should probably ask your father's permission first." "He'll say yes," Fiona assured him with absolute confidence. "He's been hoping you'd stay since the day you helped rescue him." The next morning, they gave their statements to the marshals, providing the final pieces of evidence needed to ensure Blackwood and his conspirators would face justice. Harold Prescott was also implicated, having apparently partnered with Blackwood to force small claim owners out of the area, so the Silvercliff Mining Company could expand its holdings. It explained why safety concerns at the mine had been ignored. Prescott had been diverting funds to bribe officials and hire Blackwood's men. With the reward money secure in Ethan's pocket, they borrowed a wagon and began the journey to Pueblo to collect Timothy. Sitting side by side on the wagon seat, they talked of plans for the future, of repairing the homestead, of perhaps expanding the small herd of cattle Timothy kept, of building a life together. "I've never stayed in one place very long," Ethan admitted as the wagon rolled through the beautiful Colorado countryside. "Not since I left home at 17. It'll take some getting used to." "And if you get restless?" Fiona asked, the question that had worried her finally given voice. "If the wandering calls to you again." Ethan considered this seriously. "I won't say I'll never want to see what's over the next ridge," he said honestly. "But the difference is, now I'd want you beside me when I look, and I'd always want to come back home afterward." His answer reassured her more than any false promise never to wander again could have. It acknowledged his nature while committing to their future together. Timothy was overjoyed to see them both safe, and even more pleased when Ethan formally asked for his permission to marry Fiona. "About time," was his gruff response, though his eyes shone with happiness for his daughter. "Been waiting to call you son since I saw how you looked at her." They returned to the Turner homestead a week later to find that neighbors had already begun repairs on the damage caused during the gunfight. Word of Blackwood's capture and the corruption he had brought to Durango had spread quickly, and with it, the story of Ethan's role in bringing him to justice. The community rallied around them, helping to rebuild what had been destroyed and welcoming Ethan as one of their own. The Silvercliff mine reopened under new management after Prescott's arrest, with improved safety measures implemented immediately. Many of the miners, remembering how Timothy had tried to warn them about the unsafe conditions, nominated him to serve as safety inspector once his leg healed, a position he accepted with pride. Fiona and Ethan were married that autumn, with the aspen trees turning gold against the mountains. The ceremony was simple, held at the small church in Durango with Sheriff Parker serving as Ethan's best man. Timothy, now walking with only a slight limp, proudly gave his daughter away. As they exchanged vows, Fiona thought back to that terrible day when the mine collapsed, when she had feared her father lost forever. She could never have imagined that from such tragedy would come the greatest happiness of her life, finding a partner who valued her strength, who respected her independence, who loved her completely. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and as Ethan kissed her, cheers erupted from their friends and neighbors. The reception was held at the Turner homestead, with tables set up in the yard under the golden trees. Music and laughter filled the air as people celebrated not just a wedding but a community's renewal after Blackwood's shadow had been lifted. As the sun began to set, Ethan led Fiona away from the festivities to the quiet of the porch where they had shared their first kiss. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked, his arms around her waist as they watched the last rays of sunlight paint the mountains pink and gold. "Very," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "Though I think I'll keep Turner for my work at the newspaper." Ethan chuckled at that. Her writing talents had been discovered almost by accident when she'd written an account of the mine collapse and Blackwood's capture for the local paper. The editor had been so impressed that he'd offered her a regular column, something unheard of for a woman in Durango. "Fiona Turner Irwin, journalist and rancher's wife," Ethan mused, "has a nice ring to it." "And Ethan Irwin, rancher and former scout," she added, turning in his arms to face him. "Who would have thought a mine collapse would lead to all this? I'm grateful for it every day," he said seriously. "Not for your father's injury, of course, but for bringing me here to you, for giving me a reason to stop wandering and start building." From the yard came Timothy's voice, calling them back to their celebration. Ethan offered Fiona his arm with a smile. "Shall we, Mrs. Irwin?" "We shall, Mr. Irwin," she replied, taking his arm. "We have a lifetime of building ahead of us." As they rejoined their guests, Fiona reflected that love, like silver in the mountains around them, often lay hidden until circumstance and courage brought it to light. The mine collapse that had nearly taken her father had instead given her the greatest treasure of all, a partner to face whatever life might bring, a love as enduring as the mountains themselves. 5 years later, the Irwin Turner Ranch had prospered. With Ethan's skill with animals and Fiona's sharp business sense, they had expanded from Timothy's small cattle operation to one of the most successful ranches in the area. The original homestead had grown too, with additions to accommodate their family now including 3-year-old Timothy James Irwin, named for his grandfather, and 1-year-old Elizabeth Rose, who had her mother's determined spirit and her father's blue eyes. Timothy Sr. had built himself a small cabin on the property, close enough to be part of daily life, but separate enough to give the young family privacy. His position as mine safety inspector had led to significant improvements at the Silver Cliff and other mines in the region, saving countless lives. On the anniversary of the mine collapse that had brought them together, Ethan and Fiona stood on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had on their wedding day. Little Timothy was helping his grandfather feed the chickens, while Elizabeth slept peacefully in her mother's arms. 5 years, Ethan mused, his arm around Fiona's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I rode into Durango, following Blackwood's trail." "And sometimes it feels like you've always been here," Fiona replied, leaning into his embrace. "Like this was always meant to be our life." "Maybe it was," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I followed a criminal and found a future instead." They watched as Timothy Sr. lifted his grandson onto his shoulders, pointing out something in the distant trees, probably the family of deer that often visited the edge of their property at dusk. "Any regrets?" Fiona asked softly, the question she still sometimes needed reassurance on, though less frequently as the years passed. "About staying in one place." Ethan turned her to face him, his expression serious but filled with love. "Not a single one," he assured her. "Every morning I wake up beside you. Every time I see our children. Every night we spend under this roof, I'm exactly where I want to be. Even when I'm being stubborn," she teased, referring to their most recent disagreement over whether to expand the ranch further. Especially then, he laughed. Your stubbornness saved your father from that mine and saved me from a lifetime of wandering. I'd be a fool to complain about it now. From across the yard, Timothy called to them. Come see what we found, a whole family of rabbits under the woodpile. Hand in hand, they walked toward their family, the family they had built together from the rubble of a collapsed mine and the ashes of a gunfight. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined before that fateful day, but it was richer, fuller, and more blessed than anything they could have dreamed. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan squeezed Fiona's hand. I love you, Fiona Turner Irwin, he said simply. Yesterday, today, and always. And I love you, Ethan Irwin, she replied, her heart as full as the first time she'd spoken those words. Yesterday, today, and always. Together, they joined their family in the yard, gathered around the simple joys of rabbits and chickens, and a little boy's laughter, the most precious silver ever mined from the mountains of Colorado.